wonderful film. Now, I think we talked a lot about the history, but we're going to talk about this opportunity that you all have to shape the transportation system here in the Twin Cities and this freeway, I-94, right in the heart of our region. So we want to talk about the Rethinking I-94 project. And this is a project that the Minnesota Department of Transportation studied a few years ago. It's going to determine the future of I-94, but from about downtown Minneapolis to downtown St. Paul. So it's about 7.5 miles. And for the first time since this was built in the 1960s, the pavement, the bridges, the retaining walls, it's all breaking down and it's due to be reconstructed. And so MnDOT created this project to determine what comes next. And whatever results from this project will likely be in place for another 50, 60, probably 70 years. So we call it a once in a lifetime opportunity to reimagine this infrastructure and the way that it impacts and has impacted and continues to impact surrounding neighborhoods, and to build the kind of future that we want to see here in the cities. So this is what I-94 looks like today in the corridor. Stretches, again, this corridor is all the way from Rondo and Frogtown all the way to Cedar Riverside and Seward, Minneapolis. And what we are organizing around and advocating for is the Twin Cities Boulevard, which would take this freeway and remove it and replace it with Community Boulevard and return the remaining MnDOT land to the community to be used for new affordable housing and small business space and parkland and community-owned development. And so this is a rendering that shows the before and after of what that could look like in St. Paul. And here's another image in Seward and Minneapolis that shows the highway today, and then what the Twin Cities Boulevard could look like. And the basis of, or the origins of this campaign started when we started a campaign to raise awareness about the Rethinking I-94 project. And we did some door knocking to talk with people about it, and people were very much in agreement with the kind of goals that we were talking about, like environmental justice, racial justice, climate, economic opportunity, reconnecting neighborhoods. But it was difficult to imagine what that could look like. And a lot of people asked us, like, well, can you remove a highway? Is that even allowed? And like, I really like what the organizer said at the end of the film, talking about like there's power in just like speaking up and just saying like, absolutely we can. And not only can we, like we should. And like, I'll say the same thing with the highway removal. Like I think when some people hear this idea, it's a bit radical, it's a bit out there, but like, absolutely we can. And like, hopefully by a few more slides, like y'all will be fired up to help make it happen. But we absolutely intend to make this happen. And there would be, so to talk a little bit more about this idea, and these images, by the way, like we worked with engineers, a firm called Tool Design Group, which has done some of these highway removal projects in other cities, because we wanted to make sure that we were bringing something that is plausible and starting the conversation from a place of something that we know could happen. And so this is an image of the street grid in Cedar Riverside and in Seward. The freeway severed most of the historical street grid, like you saw in the aerial image. With the boulevard conversion, you'd have the ability to reconnect the street network again, and it would free up a lot of land for new development, but it would reconnect every neighborhood in the 7.5 mile corridor. And on the next slide, I think there was also a quote in the film that talked about putting people before cars, and this boulevard could be designed in a way that really facilitated every mode of transportation. This initial design that we've talked about and we put out in the community has protected bikeways. It has a transit way running down the center of it. It does have space for cars, but there's linear park space, there's new development, and there's a lot of land. I mean, up to a football field plus in most of the corridor that could be used for something other than just pavement. And the Twin Cities Boulevard would have a lot of benefits. A lot of those issues that Yasmin talked about, we feel like this is a practical solution to address those things. It would reduce traffic and air pollution and climate emissions. It would improve the health of neighboring residents, improve walkability, reconnect neighborhoods, increase the tax base, which is a really big thing, especially as we're seeing a migration of office workers out of downtowns. And we have cities like St. Paul that are struggling as a capital city to pay for basic city services. Reducing extreme heat, cleaning the river, lowering maintenance costs. There's a, and on the next slide, oh yeah, we added this one. Yeah, just because I think it's helpful to talk about the streetcar network here. You know, this is, when we talk about mobility options, like perspective is so important. And when we were putting these slides together, we thought about some tweets that we had seen, you know, and like cars destroyed our cities, right to the point. But I think there's a map of the streetcar network. You know, you could go all the way from Lake Minnetonka to downtown Stillwater on a streetcar. And now we have the 2 light rail lines and potentially a few more extensions. But it was only 110 years ago that we had that. And so what is radical? Is it building that type of system again? Or is it continued to perpetuate a system that we know isn't working? And it's also interesting, yeah, you can see the streetcar with the potholes like this last winter. You could see streetcar tracks in the cities, which is both sad and interesting. And we also know that it's important that we're not just talking about transportation as this project advances, because when you take something that's a real negative and a drain on economic value and make it into a positive, gentrification, displacement, increases in property taxes, increases in rents could definitely result. And we hear that a lot when we do our door knocking and we talk with people. That would be completely unacceptable. So we've put together a set of policies that in partnership with some neighborhood organizations and others that we've been working for and are working with. And the hope is to continue to build on these to make sure that they're implemented before construction starts, so that the benefits are prioritized for the people who are most impacted and that people aren't displaced as a result of this project. A couple other things to point out. It was interesting to see the Embarcadero, because they didn't even really talk about this during that film, but where that freeway was ultimately built along the waterfront, an earthquake ended up critically fracturing it in the 90s, in the late 80s and into the 90s. And then they decided to remove it and to replace it with a boulevard. And if you ever go to the Ferry Building in San Francisco today, that's where that highway used to run. And it was really successful. And they've done this in other places too. Seoul is in the top right image. That was a freeway that carried about 170,000 cars a day. So that's more than I-94 carries today. They restored a historic stream. The bottom left image is in Rochester, New York, but it's happened in Milwaukee. It's happened in Chattanooga. Granted, it tends to be in smaller project corridors and less used freeways, but every time this has happened, it's been successful. And we have no reason to believe that that wouldn't be the same here in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And there's been a lot of economic benefits of that. There was a UMD study that evaluated these in other places. Duluth is also considering the future of their freeway that cuts off the city from the lakefront. Again, a lot of benefits to these projects. And to answer a couple questions that often come up, for one, we get asked sometimes, why not rebuild the freeway and just build over it and to build a cap over it? Our position is that there's a difference between mitigating the impacts of a highway and then repairing that and removing the highway itself. So when you have the freeway running underneath it, and then you build something like the example in this, that's in Dallas, which is a common example, you still have a lot of the air pollution and the health impacts from that. You still have the carbon emissions, and there's a lot of other neighborhoods that are left unmitigated and without a proper solution in their neighborhood. So our position is that removing the highway is the only way to fully deal with the highway's impacts.
So a lot of the work that we do is, and this campaign is specifically centered around a community vision for what should replace the highway. It's important to us that we're getting community buy-in and that they're able to create this vision along with us instead of proposing something that explicitly comes from us and repeating historic, incidents where people and community members have to just like deal with what is proposed to them. So we have been organizing to bring this idea to community members and meeting them in their space, door knocking. We have knocked over 30,000 doors to this day. Over 750 people have taken our feedback survey, which helps us inform, what it is that people would like to see be a part of this vision. And a lot of the responses and reception to this campaign and to this vision has been overwhelmingly positive. A lot of people didn't even think that this is a possible idea or that something that like this could happen. And so the fact that we're able to showcase and just kind of share this project as an option has been really exciting for a lot of people. So approximately 75% either support the Twin Cities Boulevard as either their preferred solution or as an option that should be fully studied. And so this vision will be living and growing, and feedback is always appreciated and will be incorporated as we go along. Just a few things that we want to highlight. We debuted at the Cedar Riverside Mobile Museum history at our open streets in Cedar Riverside on August 20th. This mobile museum highlights the history of Cedar Riverside that is kind of forgotten and kind of focusing on the community, what it was before the construction of I-94 and the U of M campus expansion that happened there. And it was a really informative and empowering museum that kind of highlights this community's history. And a lot of people were really excited, and I think there was like good interaction with it. As I mentioned, we door knock. That's something that we try to do intentionally in reaching people at where they're at. We host events and public forums to update folks on where things are at. And then feedback surveys are another way that we've been able to incorporate some of these community needs into the vision.
In closing, it's not just here in Minneapolis and St. Paul, but like every city across the country is asking these same questions, because all the Interstate Highway Act was implemented around the same time. So all these freeways are coming up for reconstruction at the same time. And the outcomes of these projects, again, will last through most of our lives. And now there's an abundance of federal infrastructure dollars from the IIJA and then the Inflation Reduction Act. Yeah. So we have a choice. We can rebuild these highways and we can perpetuate injustice and continue to destroy our planet, or we can replace highways with infrastructure that advances reparative justice and that builds the kind of communities that we want to see. And on the next slide, we think it's important to also point out that, like, when we've given this presentation in other neighborhoods, like maybe in suburban communities and places that haven't had to deal with these type of things, that these neighborhoods are still benefiting from racist redlining and disinvestment and policies that routed highways into communities that weren't theirs. And maybe that's not their fault, they didn't choose for that to happen, but we do have a choice that we can make today. And thousands of people lost their homes and businesses. Thousands of people continue to breathe worse air, have less life expectancies, less economic opportunity, and less ability to access their daily needs. And we know that that's not right. And so, yes, removing a highway and converting it to something else may cost people a few minutes of driving time. But is that worth it? And we absolutely believe that the answer is yes, that is a trade worth making, and that now is the time to repair what was lost and to benefit our shared future.
one of the things that we really try to do is try to meet people where they're at. And so door knocking is one way we can get to people. And it'd be really wonderful to see students and young voices a part of this effort as well. And, you can support this work by coming to Canvas with us and sharing with people what your experience has been, or like if this is something that you support, and hearing from folks like you can really help move this campaign along and reach more people. There's also a survey that you can take. I don't know if we have the pamphlets, but I think we can share the QR code where you can share your support for the project options, which MnDOT has released those project options in July, and 2 of the 10 options considered the Boulevard conversion, which is really exciting and something that we're really happy to see. And they're called at grade A and at grade B during the survey, and so that's kind of the equivalent to the Twin Cities Boulevard campaign. And so taking that survey, you can indicate your support for that, and we really encourage you to take that survey to share your support for this campaign. Another way you can support this work is emailing decision makers who are ultimately responsible for making this a reality. And we also have some information about that, and we can share with you all about how to do that. And lastly, donating to our cause, because we need to fund our canvassers and continue our campaign to keep going. So we do have some key upcoming dates if you're interested in learning more and just kind of partaking in this effort. The next event is actually hosted by MnDOT. They're doing an open house in the Rondo Community Library from 7:30 to 9:30. And then again at 11 to 2:30, and then 6 to 7:30. This is kind of an opportunity for you to learn more about the project options and ask questions and engage with the projects that exist and what MnDOT is saying about the project options. And then you can also ask questions and provide feedback during that time. In October, we do have legislative field hearings about I-94. More information is to come, but there'll be 2 events hosted in St. Paul and one in Minneapolis. We'll make sure to share with you all and update you on when that is. And then the next thing would be in December, which is the Rethinking I-94 Policy Advisory Committee meeting. This is a committee made up of decision makers who are ultimately can hold MnDOT accountable and tend to represent, residents that are going to be impacted by this decision. And so I don't know that we have the exact date for that, but that's also something that we can share with you all when we have more information.
Yeah, and then the last thing we have on here, Yasmin mentioned the email, super easy. You can scan this QR code, it takes you to an Action Network page. And if you type in your name and your email address and your zip code, then we've set this up to automatically send an email that you can edit as well, but there's a suggested message to all the key decision makers along the corridor. So it goes to City Council, state legislators, MnDOT staff, county commissioners, and they listen for sure. I mean, you have City Council experience. I feel like this is definitely a big reason why we've gotten as far as we have. So your voice is valuable. You have an impact over this project, and this is one way that you can do it. And then we also have a QR code at the table over there that links to the survey. And you could snap a picture of that, or if you take it links to our website, and we have all the information on that there too. But yeah, I know we're over time, but yeah.
Thank you so much. You have questions?
I guess, is there any simulation of where cars would be rerouted for that if it were to actually come to fruition? Where would traffic be directed?
Yeah, so I think we have a couple slides on it, but one thing, yeah. We always get asked about traffic. So, we point out that, as I think the film did well, urban highways don't work. So there's this thing, there's 2 sides of the coin: induced demand, which is we created this graphic to help demonstrate, which has shown that when we build bigger and bigger highways, and if we go back a slide, like in Houston, they have a 26-lane highway. It didn't work. They added 11 lanes to it. So that happens because there's from an economic standpoint, like the cost of doing something gets lowered, so people tend to do that thing more often, and then it can't handle people taking more trips and driving more often, driving longer, and land use gets spread out. And so that this is even the California Department of Transportation, like we actually based this graphic off of one of theirs. Like it is a accepted fact by most state DOTs. But what is less accepted is the flip side of that coin, which is reduced demand. So if you increase the cost, the perceived cost of doing something, and especially if you lower the perceived cost of doing alternatives, people change their behavior. So like, I think there's a misconception that traffic is like water and it just kind of like flows into the other pipes. But traffic is people. And people are making decisions based on what options are available to them. So a lot of people might drive today because I-94 is definitely the fastest way without rush hour to get around if you have a car. But if it became a little bit less convenient and the other options were dramatically improved, we would likely see significant change. And so we call that traffic evaporation. And that is like, so some people might start working remotely. We already saw 20% of traffic on I-94 go away just because of post-COVID commuting habits. And that would likely increase. People would take better public transit options. Some people might take alternate routes, but also they might make shorter trips because they might have a grocery store in their neighborhood on the highway land that they didn't have before, or daycare access that they can walk their kid to instead of driving them. Walking, biking as well, and the end result is a lot of that car traffic went away. So we saw that in San Francisco, we saw that in Seoul. We've seen it even on smaller projects, like if a street is converted from like 4 lanes to 3. There's sometimes concerns that people are going to cut through neighborhoods. We don't tend to see that happening. So a lot of people will go through these slides and they're like, I still don't believe you, but that's okay. Like we have the data that we can back it up. Philadelphia, I don't know if you heard that freeway bridge, I think a oil tanker or something exploded and it collapsed it. It was shut down for 2 weeks, and I believe that was the busiest section of freeway on the East Coast. And it was closed for 2 weeks, no alternatives. And everyone was freaking out. And this is a headline from that, didn't cause a traffic disaster. Transit ridership increased by 40%. But actually outside of the immediate area, traffic was flowing just fine. And so people adjusted, and we saw that with the 35W bridge. When that collapsed in Minneapolis, most of that traffic disappeared within a couple of days. So I think one thing we're focused on is making sure that we're demonstrating to the public that data to back this up. And so we brought in a consultant team to look at MnDOT's traffic modeling, and they're going to be doing a report hopefully by the end of the year that we can have ready by about the time that MnDOT's going to make the next step of cutting down the project options. Because inevitably, if the Boulevard conversion options are taken off the table, it's going to be because of traffic for sure. So we want to make sure we're getting ahead of that and we're bringing data to the table. So yeah, keep an eye out for that in the next few weeks.
Can I add some data points? Because this is super interesting, and I'm so grateful you could come. So I grew up on the South Shore of Boston, and it took 30 years for them to bring back one of the light rail routes that was there. Because one of the challenges when we look at those old maps is that those were often hastily constructed routes. And as you can see, for example, by the light rail extensions that are happening now, they're wildly overbuilt. There's a happy medium there somewhere that hopefully we can get back to, where it doesn't take 7 years to build every new light rail extension. But when the 30 years it took to build it on the South Shore of Boston, in the first month it was up and running, it had exceeded its first year ridership projections. So, I mean, I think that's part of what I love about this film is that rail is a preferable way to ride. That people, once they do that, they're like, oh, why would I sit in traffic? And especially the contrast between Boston here. This is the second data point. The Twin Cities have escaped some of the traffic problems, partly because the roadways were expanded with a projection for a much higher population. So the road infrastructure here was incredibly overbuilt. But as people have moved back into the cities, we're suddenly hitting a level of congestion that has been normal in many other places. So this is a really good time in some, there's a movement where people moved up to the suburbs, and a lot of those people are aging back into like downsized condos in the cities and would like not to have cars if there were alternatives. So, and I just, my third point is we have a long way to go, but there's a lot of stuff happening with like the recent legislation that helped incentivize having transit have priority over traffic lights, and things that are the nuts and bolts of what make transit a plausible alternative. Because I was telling some of the folks when we were starting, I went to grad school in Toronto, which was one of the only North American cities, presumably because Canada's outside national city lines mandate, they didn't tear out their transit. And so they had streetcar tracks continuously for that whole time. And you obviously wouldn't drive because you're always able to get on a streetcar that's going 20 times faster than traffic. And it's just like this everyday advertisement. And car ownership is minuscule compared to parallel cities in the United States. So just like examples of where this totally works.
Yeah. No,
and how.
So you mentioned that you occasionally take this discussion to suburban neighborhoods and have discussions there. I live in the suburbs, and so I'm definitely hearing from my neighbors of like, oh my gosh, what do you mean I can't take the freeway? How do you pitch the idea to people in the suburban areas beyond like, maybe you shouldn't be driving all the way through both downtowns to get to work or something like that? How do you convince people that, especially in cities, like my city has its own bus system disconnected from Metro Transit, and so to get to Hamlin, I would need to take that city bus just to get to the Metro Transit bus. It's a mess.
It would take me like an hour and 45 minutes to get from the suburbs to Hamlin because I was a commuter for 2 years, and it was awful.
I think we try to make a case about, like a moral case of that this is just the right thing to do. And I think to some extent people are persuaded by that. A lot of the presentations have been at Rotary clubs and things like that, and which is great. And then, but I've had some people that I don't think live their Rotarian values, but that's okay. We want to make sure that like the suburban communities need to be a part of this discussion, and absolutely, like people still need to have access into the core cities, and people would still be able to drive on the Boulevard, granted a little bit slower during some times of the day. But we've had a history in this region and in this country of over prioritizing certain communities at the expense of others. And now is the time to reprioritize the people that have been disproportionately impacted. So, I think it's the same broader conversation about kind of dealing with discrimination and marginalization and injustice in this country. It's like we need to be clear that yes, like we are centering certain perspectives, but that is because that is what we need to like heal and to move forward. And so yeah, I think we're concerned that MnDOT is going to try to like create this divide where it's like maybe they're pushing this survey in suburban commuters or drumming up like fears from suburban employers that like we're cutting out this transportation amenity that a lot of these people utilize. But I think like our focus is just on building a base of support within the core cities and within impacted neighborhoods, and we're hoping that that's like, the reality is we're just not going to convince everyone. Like, I went on WCCO radio during drive time with DeRusha, like, not our target audience. And
You should listen to it though. He did great.
oh, thank you, Carly. But that's okay. Some people will be convinced though, and that's our theory of change, I guess.
And the hope to set that standard so that like people like you and I who do need to utilize public transportation do have better modes of transportation and faster modes of transportation, which I think like there is that need too for some folks that live in the suburbs to be able to utilize public transportation, but when it's not efficient because we're prioritizing vehicles and cars over public transportation, it's really, really frustrating. And so like I hope that it is the standard, and it sets a high bar for what could be, instead of like what it is right now and keeping the status quo.
And yeah, that's a great point, because like we do want to make sure that we're also serving the transportation needs of suburban communities too. And the nice thing about this project, which we didn't really get into, but whatever happens, it will be phased over like probably a full decade or longer. And we have a lot of time to plan. Like if this was something that we came to consensus on and decided that we want to move forward, we could definitely decide like, all right, like how do we better meet the transit demand for suburban communities and connect to different workplaces and to find other ways to get around, like not just in Minneapolis and St. Paul, but elsewhere. Yeah, great question. Yeah, there we go.
Which we once did.
Yeah.
I want to add one more layer to this because I'm so impressed. You're doing such a great job with this, and it feels so necessary because the places that where transit really works, it's like a trapeze. You always know that where you land, your transit connection will be there, and that's one of the things we really need to build up. And like we're slowly rebuilding, but definitely have some space to go. And there's so much federal funding, as you mentioned, that's available for this. And one of the things that was really striking to me right after I moved to Minnesota, basically when they were looking for shovel-ready federal transit projects, and there's supposed to be a high-speed rail to Chicago, and Wisconsin wouldn't accept federal funding for it. And I just think I had sent them an article when we were setting this up that one of the things that's fascinating is that the right to free parking and the right to fast car transportation has become an incredibly politicized issue. And I just think it's really just such a valuable service that you're doing to bring, I mean, this is super consistent with everything I've studied in urban planning. So like, this stuff works this way, and it's being misinformationized to so many people about like, this is the government trying to control you. And like, as if it was not the government controlling who gets opportunity to have a highway like 394 that ends in a parking garage with like the finance sector.
Right. Yeah.
Like when I moved here and I saw that, it was like, wow, you can see who pays, like who the government is giving infrastructure to so visibly.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, I think people throw around the term like social engineering. It's like, we live in a transportation system that's socially engineered. That's the reason like 90% of people drive, is because there's no real alternative. So yeah, it's a great point.
And I just love this. I'm so grateful you all could watch this with me. I've watched this film like 100 times because there's so many people who are like, this worked better the way it was. And yeah, like maybe it wasn't something that paid for itself, and it was such a valuable social investment. And we shouldn't expect that it would necessarily like pay for itself on ridership fees, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be done.
Yeah.
Because we pay a lot for those highways.
Right.
In our health partly.
Yeah, for sure.
So thank you so much.